masks of the old gods. Catholicism didn't just borrow from ancient religions, it wore their faces like masks. The gods of Rome, Egypt, and Greece didn't die. They just changed names, changed clothes, and moved into churches. Start with the saints. There are over 10,000 Catholic saints, each with a job. Lost your keys? Pray to Saint Anthony. Need to pass an exam? Pray to Saint Joseph of Cupertino. Want to protect your home? Try Saint Michael. These saints function just like the old gods, each with powers, personalities, and rituals. But it goes deeper. Take Mary, the mother of Jesus. She's the most worshipped figure in Catholicism after Christ. But in the early church, Mary wasn't central. In fact, she was barely mentioned. It was only centuries later that the church began lifting her into a near-divine role. Queen of Heaven, Mother of God, Immaculate Virgin. These titles weren't Christian. They were inherited from Isis, the Egyptian mother goddess, and Cybele, the Roman mother figure. Look at the art. Mary with a glowing halo and baby in arms. That's Isis and Horus reborn. Look at the prayers. Hail Mary, full of grace. Sounds like a spell, a chant. The rituals around Mary mirror the goddess worship of old. The same with angels. Winged beings with names, ranks, and duties. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael don't come from Hebrew texts. They come from Babylonian, Zoroastrian, and Greek traditions. Catholic angels are warriors, messengers, even judges, mythical figures more than spiritual metaphors. Then there's the church buildings. Cathedrals were built on the ruins of pagan temples. They face the same direction. They use the same designs. The dome of the Pantheon in Rome became the model for St. Peter's Basilica. Even the idea of a priesthood with sacred robes, chants, and altars echoes the old priesthoods of Jupiter and Apollo. So what's left? A religion that claims to be new but carries the DNA of the old gods. A religion that speaks of monotheism but functions like polytheism. A religion that claims authority from Christ but acts in the shadow of Caesar. The masks are still on, but the eyes behind them are ancient, and yet billions follow without knowing. They kneel to statues that were once idols. They pray prayers that were once pagan chants. They light candles in churches that once held the fire of older gods. This is the final irony. The old gods never left. They just put on new names. And Catholicism, instead of casting them out, embraced them, wore them, and used them to build a religion that is both powerful and hollow. A Frankenstein religion, stitched from ancient parts, kept alive by fear, and dressed in the robes of holiness. But beneath the surface, it's still the old gods watching, resurrection in disguise. They told you he rose from the dead. But what if the truth was buried under centuries of smoke and mirrors? The idea of resurrection is powerful. It grips the heart, shakes the soul, and promises something no mortal can resist: life after death. But Catholicism didn't invent this idea. It hijacked it. Long before Christ was ever nailed to a cross, civilizations across the globe were already telling stories of gods who died and came back. Osiris of Egypt, Dionysus of Greece, and Mithras of Persia, all were symbols of resurrection. Yet Catholicism took this ancient symbol, dressed it in Roman robes, and declared it exclusive. This wasn't inspiration, it was appropriation. Why does this matter? Because resurrection, in the hands of Catholicism, became a tool not for truth, but for control. The idea that one man's return from the dead should define the salvation of billions is a brilliant lie hidden behind sacred chants and stained glass windows. The Catholic Church didn't discover resurrection. It repackaged it, gave it Latin names, and threatened eternal damnation to anyone who questioned the rebranding. Think about it. The resurrection of Jesus wasn't reported firsthand by anyone who actually witnessed it. Every gospel, every story, every divine sighting came from someone who heard it from someone else. A divine game of telephone. Catholicism built its empire on hearsay and miracle tales, then used that shaky foundation to crush empires, crown kings, and silence opposition. Even the timeline screams of manipulation. The Church waited centuries after Christ's death to decide what counted as true scripture. 4 Gospels were handpicked from dozens, not because they were accurate, but because they aligned with the image Rome wanted to project. Resurrection was polished, dramatized, and used like a spear tip to pierce through pagan cultures. Convert or die. Accept our resurrection story, or be branded a heretic. Now ask yourself, what is resurrection when stripped of ritual, myth, and Roman politics? It's hope, it's rebirth, it's transformation. These are not owned by Catholicism. They belong to humanity. But the Church wrapped them in guilt, fear, and blood-soaked sermons. It turned a universal truth into a trademark. And that trademark was enforced by sword, fire, and excommunication. From the catacombs of Rome to the altars of modern cathedrals, resurrection became a sales pitch. You die, you suffer, you confess, you tithe, and maybe, just maybe, you'll rise again. But only if you play by Catholic rules. Only if you kneel to their interpretation. Only if you ignore the thousands of older, deeper, more honest versions of the same myth told around the world. They turned a beautiful idea into a weapon. They made people fear death and hope in a story so tightly controlled it became dogma. But look past the incense, the robes, the Latin chants, and you'll see a Frankenstein monster, stitched together from old myths, powered by fear, and sold as divine truth. Resurrection was never Catholic. It was human. It was universal. And when the Church claimed it as its own, it wasn't a miracle. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Rituals, older than Rome. They say Catholicism gave the world sacred rituals. But the truth is, Rome came late to the party. From the incense swinging in churches to the murmured Latin prayers, Catholic rituals feel ancient, but ancient doesn't mean original. Every motion of the Mass, every holy gesture, every bead of the Rosary is built on something older, much older. The Catholic Church didn't create ritual. It inherited it, repackaged it, and sold it as divine. Take communion. Bread and wine turned into body and blood. That's not new. The ancient Greeks held Dionysian feasts where wine symbolized the god himself. The Persians had rituals where food and drink became sacred mediums. Catholicism took these ancient practices, added Latin, and called it transubstantiation. But it's the same old magic trick, different branding. Baptism. The idea of cleansing in water goes back to ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. Water as purification is a primal human instinct, not a Christian innovation. The Church dipped people in rivers and claimed it was the only way to wash away sin. But humans have been immersing themselves in sacred waters long before Jesus walked the earth. Even the structure of Catholic worship, the altar, the robes, the chants, is pure pagan theatre. Roman temples had altars. So did the Greeks. So did every major culture. Priests wore robes and performed sacrifices to gods long before anyone heard of Peter or Paul. Catholicism took this entire framework, replaced Zeus with Christ, and claimed divine invention. Why would they do this? Because ritual is powerful. It hypnotizes. It creates belonging, and most importantly, it controls. A ritual repeated becomes law. A chant echoed becomes truth. Catholicism didn't need truth. it needed obedience, and ritual was the leash. But here's the kicker. Many Catholic rituals don't even come from Jesus. They were created centuries later by church councils, emperors, and theologians with agendas. The church claimed authority not from revelation, but from tradition. And that tradition was built on 1,000 other traditions, layered, stitched, and repainted with Roman flair. Confession, that was formalized in the 7th century. The Rosary, inspired by Hindu prayer beads. The holy days, time to overlap pagan festivals so conversion would be smoother. The church was less about spiritual awakening and more about strategic planning. Even exorcism, one of the most dramatic rituals, has roots in Babylonian and Jewish traditions. The idea of casting out spirits isn't Catholic, it's human. But the church stamped its seal on it, dramatized it, and turned it into a weapon of fear. So what does this mean? It means Catholicism is a collector of rituals, not a creator. It walked through the graveyards of older religions, dug up their sacred acts, and gave them new names. It didn't guide people to God. It distracted them with choreography. And yet, people still kneel, still confess, still cross themselves without knowing where the ritual came from. Not because they understand it, but because ritual is addictive. It feels real, it feels holy. But feeling isn't truth. The rituals of Catholicism are ancient, yes, but not sacred in the way the church claims. They're sacred because humans made them so. Long before the Vatican rose from the ground, people danced, prayed, wept, and sang to forces they couldn't see. That's the real tradition. Catholicism just put it in a gold box and called it Christian. The next time someone tells you Catholicism is the keeper of holy rituals, remember this: it's not the origin, it's the museum. A grand, gilded museum of borrowed practices, curated by popes and priests, pretending to be the source. But the truth is older, wilder, freer, and it doesn't need Latin to be sacred. Sacred ghosts in rituals. Something ancient is hiding in plain sight. Haunting rituals, cloaked in incense and hymns, whispering the secrets of a faith that never fully let go of its ghosts. Catholicism, for all its towering cathedrals and pristine white robes, carries within it the echo of forgotten gods and forsaken spirits. What we see in the church today is not a pure stream from the teachings of Christ, but a polluted river, mixed with the ashes of ancient paganism, Roman imperial rituals, and the blood of suppressed mysteries. From the holy water to the sign of the cross, from the incense swinging in golden thuribles to the chants echoing in Latin, every gesture carries a shadow. These are not just harmless traditions, they are sacred ghosts, rituals born of other gods, other times, now hiding under the skin of something called Christianity. Let's begin with the Eucharist, the central rite of the Catholic Mass. It's presented as the sacred reenactment of Jesus' Last Supper. The priest raises a wafer and a cup, declaring them to be the literal body and blood of Christ. Transubstantiation, they call it, a mystical transformation. But look deeper, and what you'll find is a mirror of ancient blood sacrifice and divine consumption. In Mithraic cults, practiced centuries before Christ, the eating of sacred meals, symbolic of divine flesh and blood, was common. Even in the rites of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and madness, followers consumed symbolic flesh and drank wine to unite with the divine. The Christian ritual didn't abolish these practices, it absorbed and sanctified them. The use of incense, swung through sacred space to sanctify the air, is not unique to Catholicism. In ancient temples of Egypt, incense was offered to the gods as food for the spirit, The smoke was believed to carry prayers to the heavens. Rome adopted it, Persia used it, and the church baptized it. But the ghost remains. The act is still there. The same movement, the same smell, the same mystical ascent of smoke. It's paganism repackaged, a spiritual sleight of hand. Latin, the so-called dead language of the church, was never holy. It was the language of emperors, of Caesars who declared themselves gods. It was the tongue of power, conquest, and law. When the early church adopted it, it wasn't because it was sacred, it was because it was strategic. And yet, for centuries, Catholic masses were delivered in Latin, keeping the faithful mystified and submissive, while the clergy whispered ancient spells in a dead tongue. The ghost of empire remained alive, speaking through priests instead of generals. Even the garments worn during Mass are echoes of Roman officials and pagan priests. The mitre worn by bishops, its origins trace back to the fish head hats of Dagon priests in ancient Mesopotamia. The cassock, the alb, the chasuble, all have roots in imperial or priestly dress that predates Christianity. These are not just clothes, they are symbols, worn by those who claim authority not only from Christ, but from traditions buried in the soil of forgotten temples. Catholicism's veneration of saints is another ghost dancing through its rituals. Saints are often local deities reborn. Saint Bridget of Ireland was once the goddess Bridget, associated with fertility and fire. When the church couldn't kill her, it canonized her. The shrines, the candles, the pilgrimages, these mirror the offerings made to gods and spirits across cultures. Even the relics of saints, the bones, clothes, or blood, mirror the ancient practice of connecting to divine power through the physical remains of the holy. What is this if not ancestor worship veiled in Christian terminology? Consider the Marian devotion, the worship of Mary. She is the Divine Mother, clothed in stars, crowned like a queen, ascending to heaven. She is Isis of Egypt. She is Cybele of Phrygia. She is the great mother of every pagan tradition. The Catholic Church says she is the mother of Jesus. But her image, her titles, her prayers, they all whisper of older myths. She stands in cathedrals like a goddess reborn, offered flowers and songs, wrapped in gold. This is not mere respect. This is the old worship, revived under a new name. Let's not forget the ritual of confession, a dark booth, a priest hidden behind a screen, and a whisper of sins exchanged like currency. This too has echoes of mystery religions, where initiation and secret knowledge were passed through confession, through surrender, through secrecy. The Catholic priest becomes the gatekeeper, the one who holds the keys, not only to heaven, but to the soul's relief. Yet in doing so, he plays a role once reserved for the oracle, the mystic, the priestess of Apollo. Then there is the exorcism rite, dramatic, terrifying, cloaked in ancient formulae. What we see is not just the casting out of demons. It is the continuation of old magical practices where words held power and rituals controlled the invisible world. Exorcism in the church is less about salvation and more about theatre. It's spiritual warfare choreographed for effect, rooted in ideas that go back to Sumerian demonology and Babylonian magic. Even the church calendar is filled with ghosts. Christmas is set on December 25th, not because of Jesus' birth date, but because of the Roman festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Easter aligns with the spring equinox and echoes the fertility rites of Ishtar. The holy days, holidays, are not Christian inventions. They are Christian appropriations. Catholicism didn't erase paganism. It invited it in, dressed it in robes, and gave it a new name. The sacred architecture of Catholic churches tells the same story. The layout of cathedrals, the nave, the altar, the dome, mirrors the temples of Rome and Greece. The rituals performed inside are patterned after imperial ceremonies. Even the positioning of relics under the altar, like seeds of power, comes from the practice of burying sacred objects beneath temples to imbue them with spiritual energy. And what of the saints who never die? Their bodies, miraculously preserved, put on display like trophies of eternal life. These are not just symbols of holiness. They are talismans, kept in glass boxes, kissed by the devout, guarded like magical relics. It's necromancy, coated in gold leaf. Every bell that rings, every candle lit, every procession through the streets is a whisper from another world. A world where gods walked among men, where priests mediated divine forces through ritual. That world never ended. It was baptized. These sacred ghosts are not accidents, they are survival strategies. The Church, in its early days, understood that to conquer the world, it had to speak its language, not just with words, but with symbols, with rituals, with spirit. Catholicism became the Frankenstein of religions, not because it was created with evil intent, but because it was stitched together from the corpses of 100 faiths, and each part still remembers where it came from. So the next time you walk into a Catholic Mass, look past the golden chalice and the velvet robes. Smell the incense, hear the chants, watch the procession. You are not witnessing the pure teachings of Christ. You are watching ancient ghosts perform a ritual that never truly died.